By the time the HOA board discovered their rent had skyrocketed by 1,000%, I was already seated at the head of their long conference table, casually drinking coffee from a mug emblazoned with, "This meeting could have been an email." 3 of the board members were hurriedly paging through their freshly updated lease documents, their eyes widening in disbelief at the staggering figures. The treasurer, a middle-aged man wearing a faded beige golf shirt, muttered under his breath that this simply had to be against the law. Directly across from me sat Ella Mercer, the president of the Red Bluffs HOA, jabbing one of her long acrylic nails at the offending page. "This is nothing short of extortion," she barked. "We will fight this tooth and nail. We will drag you into court. We will do whatever it takes to stop it." "You are welcome to sue your landlord," I replied evenly. "Just be certain your attorney carefully reviews page 3, particularly the section where you consented to binding arbitration, and recognize the landlord's unrestricted right to adjust rents to current market rates following any sale of the underlying property." Elaine lifted her gaze slowly. "Sale," she echoed faintly. I smiled and pushed a crisp folder across the polished table. On top lay a freshly recorded deed, officially signed and stamped by the county recorder, gleaming like an irrevocable verdict. "That's right," I said. "Congratulations. I am your new landlord." A heavy silence descended on the room like thick morning mist. Through the open door of the HOA office, I could clearly see the rows of townhomes where the entire conflict had begun, the very ones they had tried to demolish my old ranch house to make room for. The same ground where my family had lived and worked for generations. Elaine's face drained of color. "You," she whispered. "It's you, the ranch guy." I took another slow sip of coffee. "Yes, Elaine," I said. "The ranch guy. You gave exactly 24 hours to vacate. Funny thing about land, it has a long memory for who it truly belongs to. My name is Jake Rowe, 38 years old, a licensed civil engineer by profession, but a ranch kid by blood and upbringing. For nearly a century, Rowe Ranch occupied a rugged stretch of high desert just outside Red Bluff, a small town where folks still waved as they drove past because cruise control and therapy sessions hadn't fully taken over yet. The ranch wasn't some sprawling movie set operation. It was a weathered old house, with a wide wraparound porch, a long, low barn that leaned just enough to alarm visitors, but precisely enough for my father to insist she's holding strong, and 40 acres of scrubland supporting a handful of cattle, few horses, and a creaky windmill that howled whenever the breeze changed direction. When my parents passed within a few years of each other, the place came to me. By that time, the developers had descended, drawn by the scent of profit and endless board meetings. They snapped up parcels on 3 sides of us and erected Red Bluffs, a Western-themed master-plan community with street names like Cactus Ridge and Sunset Spur. Even though there wasn't a single real cactus and most sunsets were now obscured by their own stucco walls, I held firm. The developer wanted the ranch and offered a lowball price. I refused. They came back with more money. I still said no. Eventually, they built around us, encircling the ranch in a giant horseshoe, then penned us in behind a phony split rail fence and a cluster of decorative boulders, as though we were merely part of the landscaping package. Then they handed daily management over to the HOA. Enter Elaine Mercer, mid-50s, salon blonde hair, gold necklace, carrying the unmistakable air of someone who actually says, per my last email in conversation. She claimed the largest house on the highest cul-de-sac, and promptly crowned herself president of the Red Bluffs HOA. Her domain consisted of rows of nearly identical beige homes adorned with fox rustic shutters, 2 community pools enforcing strict no floaties rules, and trash cans inspected with tape measures to ensure they remained invisible from the street. Viewed from their manicured sidewalks, our ranch was an eyesore. It didn't match. It didn't coordinate. It lacked a pergola. To her, it was a glaring problem. To me, it was the last remnant of what this land had looked like before the glossy brochures took over. The first HOA letter arrived in a clear plastic sleeve, as if it were an invitation to an exclusive club. Notice of violation to occupant, former Rowe Ranch, parcel You are in violation of Red Bluff's community standards regarding non-compliant fencing, unsightly outbuildings, storage of agricultural equipment visible from common areas, and presence of livestock within visual corridor. Please correct within 30 days to avoid fines and legal action." I stared at it for a long while, then scrawled across it in thick Sharpie, "Not in your HOA. Return to sender." I mailed it back. Felt satisfying. A week later, an email arrived from info@redbluffbluffshoa.org. "Dear Mr. Rowe, while your parcel is technically outside the original plat, our attorney has advised we possess adjacent influence authority over properties that impact community aesthetics." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. That was the first drip. Then came the deluge. Elaine appeared at the fence line in a wide sun hat and wedge sandals, informing me my barn clashed with the architectural style of Red Bluffs. HOA volunteers began snapping photographs whenever they strolled the walking path behind my pasture. I found a polite notice taped to my mailbox suggesting I might consider painting the barn a neutral, community-approved color. I ignored them all. The letters escalated to threats. Legal counsel advises we can file for condemnation of unsafe structures that affect property values. We reserve the right to pursue emergency action if you refuse to cooperate. I checked with the county. The ranch was fully grandfathered, zoned agricultural. Barn and house predated the subdivision by decades. The HOA had zero jurisdiction beyond their recorded boundary line. "That woman shows up here a lot," the county zoning officer told me, rolling his eyes. "Always trying to get us to do something about your place. You're fine. Just document everything." So I did. Every letter, every email, every time Elaine tried to chat at the fence, explaining how a smooth transition to community standards would benefit everyone. Then came the drought. Prices climbed. Costs crushed us. I sold off most of the cattle, kept a few horses, took on extra engineering contracts in town to keep the place afloat. Vacant land values exploded as investors circled for rental opportunities and build-to-rent projects. Suddenly, my ranch wasn't merely an eyesore, it was prime, unrestricted real estate. You could almost hear Elaine grinding her teeth from across the dry wash. The day everything broke started like any other. Hot, dusty, and with me coaxing a stubborn old tractor back to life. The white SUV pulled up to my gate, first HOA logo on the door, naturally. Then a second SUV arrived, this one bearing a local code enforcement decal. Out stepped Elaine, a man with a clipboard, and another in a suit, already sweating through his dress shirt. "Mr. Rowe," the clipboard guy announced, "I am with County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unsafe structures on your property." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, barn's unsightly again." "We have had reports that the barn is structurally unsound and poses a risk to neighboring properties," he said, avoiding eye contact. "The HOA submitted a structural assessment." He handed me a report. I didn't recognize any of the names. The photos were laughably biased, tight close-ups of flaking paint labeled evidence of advanced decay. Behind him Elaine stood, arms crossed, lips tight. "For the safety of our residents," she said, "we cannot simply stand by while that shack threatens our investment." The man in the suit cleared his throat. "I am with Palmer and Reed," he said, offering a business card. "Counsel for Red Bluffs. Based on a review of county codes, we believe we can pursue an emergency teardown if the structure is deemed hazardous." I flipped through the assessment. "That beam is solid," I said, pointing. "That crack is cosmetic. I'm a civil engineer, I fix this stuff for a living." "Be that as it may," the code guy replied, "I am obligated to inform you that pending formal inspection, there is a recommendation for immediate mitigation." "Mitigation meaning what exactly?" I asked. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly uneasy. "Demolition of the barn and potentially the house as well." Elaine stepped forward then, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Jake, please listen to me. This really doesn't need to turn ugly. If you simply agree to sell the property, we can incorporate your land into phase 2 of the development. You walk away with a generous check. We get to tidy things up and construct proper, high-quality homes. It's a win for everybody." "How much are we talking?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. Without hesitation, she quoted a figure. It was laughably low, not even close to fair market value for raw land, let alone a working ranch with established water rights and utilities. "I'll have to decline," I replied. Her expression turned stony. An hour later, following a series of strained phone calls and a comically hurried inspection that consisted mainly of the inspector squinting suspiciously at the barn from a safe 20-foot distance, the clipboard guy came back with an official form. "Given the documented hazards," he stated, reading carefully from a script to keep his voice neutral, "you are hereby ordered to vacate the premises and demolish all non-compliant structures within 24 hours. I stared down at the document. "So you're giving me one single day to bulldoze a century-old barn, and quite possibly my family home, because an HOA doesn't like the scenery. Failure to comply will result in county-contracted demolition billed directly to your account," he continued, reciting the standard warning. Elaine's smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. She could practically taste triumph. "Of course," she added smoothly, "if you rather spare yourself all this unpleasantness, the board remains willing to reconsider our previous offer." I took the order, folded it with deliberate care, and tucked it into my back pocket. 24 hours, I echoed. "That is correct," the clipboard guy confirmed. "Great," I said. "Then I have exactly 24 hours to decide precisely how I'm going to make every one of you regret this." I delivered it quietly, no yelling, no overt threats, just a calm declaration of intent. Most folks handed a 24-hour demolition notice would spiral into panic. I drove straight into town instead. First stop, the county recorder's office. I requested complete copies of everything on file for my property, the full history of HOA complaints, and that ridiculous emergency order. Then I headed to an address I'd spotted buried in the original developer's paperwork, a P.O. box tied to a shell company called Red Bluff Holdings LLC. A bit of digging revealed that the original developer had defaulted on a massive construction loan. The bank had bundled and unloaded a portfolio of distressed assets. A regional investment firm snapped them up at a discount, including several commercial parcels and the ground beneath most of the rental units in Red Bluff Bluffs, plus the land under the HOA office itself. Those parcels operated on long-term ground leases, providing steady, if unexciting, income to owners who had never even visited the site. I dialed the contact number listed for the investment group. An hour later, I was sitting in a sterile office, across from a bored-looking executive named Trevor, a man whose priorities clearly boiled down to capitalization rates and clocking out by 5. "You currently own the ground leases for these specific addresses?" I asked, sliding over a printed map highlighting the subdivision, the row of upscale rental townhomes that housed half the board members, the strip containing the HOA office, and several high-end rental properties. "Yeah," he confirmed. "Low-maintenance tenants. The HOA deals with day-to-day headaches. We simply collect the ground rent checks. Profitable enough?" I pressed. He grimaced slightly. "We've actually been considering unloading that particular bundle. Too much HOA drama. Some odd encroachment disputes involving an old ranch parcel. Complete headache. I'll buy the whole package," I stated. He blinked in surprise. "Have you got that kind of capital lying around?" he asked, skeptical. "Let's just say, I have financing arranged," I replied, along with extremely strong personal motivation to close quickly. Financing in this case meant maxing out a home equity line, roping in a trusted colleague from my engineering network who enjoyed complicated real estate plays, and liquidating every available dollar from savings, investments, and the emergency reserve I'd sworn never to touch. Trevor quoted a price. Steep, but reasonable. "Can we close within 72 hours?" I asked. "If your funds are legitimate, sure," he shrugged. "We're not particularly attached to the asset." I wired the earnest money deposit that same afternoon. My partner bulldozed the paperwork through channels at warp speed. Turns out, he'd once endured his own nightmare HOA battle and was, in his exact words, spiritually committed to the cause. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, I left the barn untouched. Instead, I meticulously photographed every inch of the structures, hired an independent structural engineer, someone with no ties to the HOA, to produce a detailed report confirming the barn was aged but perfectly sound, and formally filed an appeal against the demolition order, which immediately triggered an automatic stay of enforcement. The county clerk, bless her heart, stamped the paperwork and muttered under her breath, "I told them 24 hours was ridiculous." 2 days later, we closed escrow. I walked out of the title company as the official new owner of the land beneath. The row of premium rental townhomes occupied by several board members, the ground under the HOA's pristine little office building, and the parcel containing the subdivision's only overflow parking lot. Red Bluffs owned their houses. I now own the earth they stood on. Every single one of those ground leases contained a lovely little provision. Upon transfer of ownership of the underlying land, the new owner reserves the right, at their sole discretion, to adjust lease terms to current market rates upon the next renewal cycle. And guess what conveniently fell due for renewal in 60 days? Every last one of them. On the morning of the big reveal, I dressed sharper than I had in years, polished boots, pressed button-down shirt, clean shave. Malice, it turns out, looks best when neatly ironed. I formally requested agenda time at the upcoming HOA board meeting, listing myself as the new ground lease representative. They adored official titles. My request was approved without question. Inside the clubhouse, Elaine presided from the head of the table, gavel in hand. The treasurer sat nearby with a spreadsheet pulled up and a calculator that was rapidly becoming a fidget device. A scattering of residents occupied folding chairs in the back, ready to air grievances about mailboxes or pool hours. I patiently endured a heated debate over holiday light restrictions until they finally reach a Danube business. Item 4, Ground Lease Renewal Discussion. Elaine tapped her neat stack of documents. As you all know, she began, we've been in negotiations with Red Bluff Holdings regarding the upcoming land lease renewals. They've been slow to respond, but they understand we're a vital anchor for the entire community. Once we secure favorable rates, we can actually, I interrupted, rising to my feet. That's exactly why I'm here today. She frowned deeply. Excuse me, this segment is restricted to board discussion only. I placed a thick folder on the table. On top sat the freshly recorded deed. Beneath it are the lease assignment documents, followed by my newly printed business card. My name is Jacob Rowe, I announced clearly, loud enough for the residents in the back to hear every word. And as of last week, I am now the owner of the parcels beneath your rental townhomes, this very office building, and the overflow parking lot. The treasurer's mouth actually fell open. Elaine let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. That's preposterous, she declared. We've maintained a long-standing relationship with Red Bluff Holdings. They would have informed us of any sale. They did, I replied, tapping the paperwork. They informed you by promptly cashed my wire transfer. A board member huddled in the far corner and muttered under his breath, "Oh, my God." I pushed another thick stack of documents across the polished table. These, I went on calmly, represent your updated lease agreements. The original terms were inked 15 years ago. Market rates have shifted somewhat since then. Somewhat. The treasurer let out a high-pitched squeak as he frantically turned the pages. This is 10 times our current payment. Exactly market rate, I confirmed, plus a reasonable surcharge for what I've termed the 24-hour demolition inconvenience fee. Elaine's cheeks flushed a deep, angry crimson. You can't simply jack up our rent like this, she snapped. We're a homeowners association. We have protections. Of course you do, I replied evenly. You have the right to pay your landlord on time or to relocate your office, your premium rental units, and all associated facilities elsewhere. The issue, I noted, gesturing toward the window overlooking the neat rows of townhomes and the modest HOA office structure, is that there isn't anywhere else to go. You'd require new land, a different building, separate parking, and the city isn't particularly eager to issue fresh permits these days. Something about infrastructure strain and traffic impacts. The treasurer's fingers flew across his laptop keys, running desperate calculations. At these figures, he whispered hoarsely, we'd have to raise dues. Substantially. How substantially? A resident called out from the folding chairs, suspicion heavy in his voice. The treasurer swallowed hard. Triple, at minimum. The resident's wife shot to her feet. Triple, she echoed incredulously. We're already shelling out more than my parents' entire mortgage payment. Alternatively, I offered, you could negotiate revised terms. I'm flexible when it comes to alternative compensation. Elaine's eyes narrowed to slits. Such as, a board seat, perhaps? I actually chuckled. Absolutely not. I want something far simpler. I placed one final document on the table. The bold header declared, easement and permanent non-interference covenant. Here's the arrangement, I explained. You execute this agreement. In exchange, I cap your lease increases at a reasonable bump, nothing like the tenfold jump. What you receive in return is the HOA's irrevocable acknowledgement that it possesses zero jurisdiction over Row Ranch or any future ownership of the parcel. No further complaints, no additional demolition attempts, no harassment of the landowner whatsoever. The association will actively endorse a protective zoning designation shielding the ranch from any compelled future development. And I added, pausing for emphasis, your current president will deliver a prepared statement at the next general community meeting recognizing the ranch's historical significance and issuing a formal apology for prior oversteps. You could sense the atmosphere in the room shift dramatically. The attending residents weren't staring at me anymore, they were fixating on Elaine. You cannot possibly be serious, she said, her voice thinning to a strained edge. I'm entirely serious, I assured her. Because should you decline, the full tenfold rates remain in force. The HOA's operating budget collapses. Assessments soar. Residents suddenly become very curious about why leadership chose to provoke the individual who now holds your ground. Leases. A resident toward the rear, a sturdy guy in a faded work shirt, neck reddened from the sun, lifted his hand. Let her cover it personally, he shouted. She's the one who's been fixated on tearing down that ranch. Low murmurs spread, accompanied by several nods of agreement. The treasurer glanced from the proposed leases to the easement draft, then fixed his gaze on Elaine. If we refuse to sign, he said softly, we either drive the association into insolvency or forfeit the rental properties and office entirely. If we accept, he turned toward me, you're locking the increase at precisely what figure? I quoted a number noticeably higher than their existing rate, yet manageable with careful budgeting. He punched in a few rapid figures. That's feasible, he admitted, provided we trim certain non-essential line items. His eyes lingered meaningfully on an entry marked President's Discretionary Community Enhancement Fund. Elaine bored holes into me with her stare, as if sheer willpower could ignite me. This is extortion, she hissed. Hardly, I countered. I'm merely leveraging the free market framework your developer established. You all revere property rights and ironclad contracts, don't you? Well, here's one your board willingly executed. Naturally, they signed. HOA boards crave authority, but they crave avoiding furious confrontations with their constituents even more. They inked the easement and non-interference covenant, the revised lease renewals, and the scripted apology statement. 2 weeks later, beneath strands of inexpensive LED string lights draped across the community clubhouse, Elaine gripped a microphone and a single sheet of paper reviewed and revised by legal counsel at least half a dozen times. Her voice trembled slightly. As president of the Red Bluffs Homeowners Association, she recited, I wish to formally recognize that Row Ranch constitutes a historically vital property and a cherished element of our broader community's identity. I leaned against the rear wall, arms folded, fighting to keep my satisfaction from showing too plainly. Past initiatives undertaken by this board regarding the ranch were ill-advised and overstepped our proper bounds. Going forward, we pledge to honor the ranch's autonomy and actively advocate for its ongoing preservation. Someone near the front actually applauded. Another resident called out, does this mean we finally stop getting those endless emails about his fencing? Yes, she replied through clenched teeth. It does. From a legal standpoint, the demolition order quietly expired during the appeal process. Bolstered by my independent engineer's thorough report and an awkward conversation between the county attorney and code enforcement about improper HOA influence, the ranch secured a permanent protective zoning layer. Nobody is raising anything without navigating a regulatory obstacle course daunting enough to discourage divine intervention. The recorded easement and covenant now encumber the HOA-controlled parcels in perpetuity, binding every future board. Financially, the association now forwards me monthly ground rent payments. Their upscale rental units generate a steady, satisfying income stream. Even the quaint office building that former headquarters of sanctimonious correspondence contributes nicely toward retiring my acquisition loan. On the ranch itself, I reinforced the barn with new bracing, applied a fresh coat of traditional red paint, added a modest riding arena, and began offering guided trail rides and lessons. I erected a straightforward sign at the entrance gate, Row Ranch, established 1924, endure droughts, depressions, and one exceptionally persistent HOA. The sweetest moments come when I spot them board members arriving or departing the office, glancing uphill toward the ranch as though they can physically sense the reversed hierarchy. Each time they mail my check. Elaine resigned from the presidency several months later. The official explanation cited health concerns. Unofficially, residents had grown weary of elevated dues funding her personal crusade against barns. The incoming board proved far more reserved. They offer friendly waves when our paths cross on the trails. A few have even enrolled their children in riding lessons. Just last week, one remarked half seriously, maybe we ought to feature in the newsletter how the ranch actually boosts our property values. Funny how perspectives shift. If there's a lesson in all this, it's straightforward. HOA boards adore preaching about property rights until someone wields them more effectively. They granted me 24 hours to obliterate a century-old legacy, so I granted myself 72 hours to acquire the ground beneath their headquarters, scrutinize every clause, and redirect their preferred tools, rents, regulations, and endless paperwork straight back at them. These days, whenever their payment arrives, I grin, tap the envelope lightly, and reflect, you demanded I demolish my family's ranch. I simply elevated your rent tenfold instead. And up on the ridge overlooking their uniform rooftops, the old barn creaks defiantly in the breeze and endures stubborn, unsightly to a few, flawless to me. A quiet testament that, in any contest between clipboards and land deeds, the land prevails when the right owner holds the title.